We're live. We're live.
Excuse me, I have to share this first.
Apologies about the delay. We've got a slight technical difficulty, and
I don't have to turn this off.
I'm just going to.
Music.
Hold on.
I apologise. This is the most amateur live stream we've ever had because we've got Sussex Friends of Israel in the house who are blasting the live stream out on the phone as we speak, and we're now good. So over to Arsen, who's flown in specially for this conversation all the way from sunny Israel.
I have indeed. I'm sorry I've not been able to bring the sun with me here, but it is really an honor for me to be with you guys, who honestly are not only mates and friends and partners, but people whom I have tremendous amount of respect for what you do. Certainly on my behalf, on behalf of the Israeli, behalf of the International Legal Forum as well. I've come from Tel Aviv. I've come from Israel. We, as you know, in the last few weeks, we came out of this devastating war. Had something over 4,500 rockets, 13 people died, countless families, mine as well in shelters. But we've come out of this war. We have an Iron Dome. Mm. You guys are the Iron Dome, as far as I'm concerned, for the Jewish people. So one of the messages I really wanted to stress and to show and to reiterate is the fact that I'm mindful of the fact that even though we have a ceasefire that's beginning to hold, and just in as much as I know you guys were on the front lines, literally you guys were and are on the front lines fighting antisemitism, standing up for Israel, standing up for us when we are literally under fire and rocket attack. I want you to know that in the same way that as Israelis, that we too are cognizant of what you are experiencing and suffering in this visceral explosion of violence against Jews, not only in the UK but elsewhere. We're seeing in certain parts across Europe and around the world. So for you guys to know, and it's important for me, for us, that just as you stood with us, we in Israel also stand with all of you during these times. And at the end of the day, there's this principle of Collier, that we're all responsible for one another, and that's certainly the way I approach it, the way I believe we ought to approach it. And attack on a Jew anywhere is attack on Jews everywhere. So I know you guys are on the front lines, so what you're doing is not easy, and I know you've experienced it personally, Joseph, and I know you guys as well. So I think that's, for me, the first and most important thing to know.
And I think from our perspective, we kind of see that, well, I can speak for me. Jewish survival is dependent on a Jewish state. History's taught us without a state, we are very, very vulnerable. And every Israeli has national service. They have to serve their country. Those of us that live outside of Israel benefit from that security should anti-Semitism arise, like it is in the UK at the moment. We benefit from the state of Israel. So the least we can do in absence of serving our country is actually defending the Jewish state from overseas. And just in case people aren't familiar with everyone who's on the call, you should be, because it's a superstar lineup. We have Simon Cobbs from Sussex Friends of Israel, obviously Arsen, and David Collier, who needs no introduction, but just in case there's one or two viewers who isn't familiar.
You can introduce yourself as well?
Because it's on my channel. If you don't know me, I'm Joseph Cohen. I run the Israel Advocacy Movement. And maybe if we just quickly shout out our socials so people can find us as well before jumping into the conversation.
Yeah. So I'll start. I'm Sussex Friends of Israel. So you can find us at Sussex Friends on Twitter, and just search Sussex Friends of Israel on Facebook. We've got a large following in the UK, one of the largest social media followings, approaching 100,000 people now, so you should be able to find us quite easily.
Those that don't know, you can follow me primarily on Twitter, handle Ostrov_A, and also through my organization, which I'm proud to share, the International Legal Forum, and at the underscore ILF, and also on our Facebook page, the International Legal Forum as well.
Best place to find me causing trouble.
It's a Palestinian demonstration, anti-Israel demonstration.
Labour meetings.
It's Twitter. and handle is @Mishal, MISHTAL.
Perfect. So go back to the conversation.
Yeah, I mean,
I think what you were asking is, I think we chatted before, and you asked a question. What is it? Why is it different now?
Yeah, I mean, it feels, this is not the first wave of anti-Semitism. Obviously, you guys have experienced. You've experienced multiple waves, including in previous campaigns that Israel has fought.
This feels different.
But Israel has fought with Hamas in Gaza. But I mean, I'm looking also at the figures which I've seen from the CST, from the Communal Security Trust, which shows an extraordinary figure that in weeks since the campaign against Hamas, or I should say more accurately, the campaign that Hamas launched against Israel by initially firing the rockets at Jerusalem, there was something like about 500% rise in anti-Semitic incidents. But it's not just the number, but it's the nature, it's the sheer vitriol and the hatred. And when you see this convoy of cars going through central London, shouting the most obscene things, when you look at people marching through London, chanting, "We want Zionists, we want their blood," and when you're seeing assaults against individuals for no other reason than the fact that they're Jews and visibly Jewish, it's something, I think, feel like there's something different this time. So I'm wondering if that's the sense that you guys are feeling, and if that is the case, what is it that's different about this time than perhaps previously?
I look on it like almost like an increasing scale. I went to Israel in '87, and I came back in 2006. I did 19 years in Israel. So when I left in '87, if a student in the UK was going to take time off, do a gap year or something like this, he was going to head for a kibbutz. When I came back in 2006, he was more likely to join the ISM, the International Solidarity Movement. And it was actually that difference that made me get involved when I got back and say, well, I need to investigate what's going on here. I think things are gradually getting worse. So I think each time that we have an event in Israel, it's going to be worse than the time before. I think this is worse in 2014. And I think the next time, as and when it happens, will be worse than this time. I don't think it's a difference as in, there's suddenly been a change. I think this is a gradual thing that's been going on for 20 years. I think it started, no doubt, we'll discuss Durban. I think its roots are in Durban in 2001. And in the alliance between Islamist movements in the UK and the hard left in the UK that took form in the Iraq demonstrations. And I basically think that's just growing in strength and number. Networking, I think social media has obviously amplified its ability to network. And I think that's what we're facing.
I think, sorry, but we also got to factor in something which has, which really, for me, signalled, and I hate to use the term at the beginning at the end, but it certainly marked a change in the situation here, and that was the rise of Corbyn. Because when we saw him become accepted by the Labour Party as their leader, it took anti-Zionism to a place we've never seen before. And
did Corbyn open a gene?
Yes,
Pandora's box. That mainstream
Absolutely.
what we're seeing.
And we can't, no matter what we try. I mean, this has been the perfect storm, because from Corbyn we had a relatively quiet period, although we can talk about Starmer later, but we didn't have enough done to put it back in the box. And then we had the recent troubles, which has unleashed a new wave of anti-Zionism. And my opinion is, and knowing from seeing what I've seen and the rise in the amount of people who are now openly anti-Israel and some would say anti-Semitism, we are never going to get it back in the box. Not. Somebody said the other day, which is something that stuck with me for a long time, we've lost a generation, and we now have to start. I think we have to start.
Lost a generation
of kids.
I
think the universities have been going badly for a long time, but unfortunately, we've seen it now since the Free Palestine movement became so trendy, we're starting to lose the schools, and I don't know if we're going to be able to get it back in the box. Not this generation, and that's the problem. So maybe do we at this point think to ourselves, okay, we've lost this generation and start for the next generation, or do we start and try and save this one?
So I think even before going there, I think there's one thing that hasn't been discussed, and it's a very politically sensitive thing to say, but there's no escaping the fact the biggest opposition to the state of Israel is coming from the Muslim community. The Jews who lived in Muslim lands have been chased out. There's over 1 million refugees from all the Muslim states. And that's not to say that every Muslim is hostile to Israel. That's obviously not the case. But as demographics in the UK have changed, that's played a major factor in the hostility towards Israel. And so to connect it to what you're saying, there's a real responsibility on Zionists, Jews, supporters of Israel, who are living in communities where there are large Muslim populations. We reach out and engage with those populations, because the difference between what happened in the Muslim world and what's happening here is both Jews and Muslims are a minority in this community. And so it's much easier to have conversations about differences of opinion when you're both minorities, rather than where one is dominant over the other, be it in Israel, be it in the Muslim world. And so we have a real opportunity where we can actually engage with people who definitely have a more hostile position on Israel than the average non-Muslim, let's say, Christian British person. And so I think the other aspect is exactly what you were saying about Corbyn. Many of the Corbynites who were posting anti-Semitic content a few months ago, a couple of years ago, a year ago, they now feel vindicated, because they were saying, we were saying, look at all this anti-Semitism. You were denying the Holocaust. You were playing on blood libels. You were pointing out genuine examples of anti-Semitism. They're now saying, oh, no, we're against what Israel doing. And look, here's Israel being what they perceive to be a pariah within the region. And so I think it's that they're the two key things that have come together in this particular conflict. Is you have a larger Muslim population, and you have a more hostile far left population, and that's just, it's brought, so obviously everyone in those movements isn't anti-Semitic, but when anti-Semitism has been captured on film, it's coming from these movements, and it's coming either from the fringe, from the mainstream. I don't know how representative the anti-Semitism. So when we saw someone walking down the street, as you're saying we're going to find some Jews, we're going to get some Zionists, we want their blood. I don't know how many people within those respective communities hold those views. I'd hope it's a tiny, tiny fringe, but they're there, and they're more vocal, and they're more emboldened than ever before. So there's a real responsibility to act now and try to engage with both these communities and the wider British society.
Have you seen, with this sort of explosion of social anti-Semitism, we're talking about other minorities, other groups in society, other allies of the Jews of certain student, do you believe that during this particular crisis, during this time, that this society as a whole, and some of these other groups who you've stood shoulder to shoulder with, have they stood up shoulder to shoulder with you guys in denouncing what is happening and showing solidarity?
I don't think there's been enough of it. I think there's been lip service.
Is it the outrage mostly within the Jewish community, or are we seeing it in the recognition?
There is large, because as Joe just pointed out, the Islamist community, not the Muslim community, but the rise of Islamism within the UK has many people worried. So when that demonstrates on the streets as it has in this wave of anti-Semitism that we saw, there is some support from the community against that, because they also see it as hostile. Just to add into something Joe said as well, which I think nailed the point, which is over the last 3 or 4 years, between 2015 and 2019, the Corbynites were so suppressed. There was an intense attack against them, against the anti-Semitism and against the Labour anti-Semitism. And they were kicked out, they were vilified, and they were pushed into a corner and marginalised. And so, yeah, there was a release here for them. it was, as Joe said, vindication. Suddenly they could stand up and say, see, we told you, look.
But the thing is, they're using bad information to do that.
Of course.
We, you know, if we're going to really talk about things here, you know, we've got so much to discuss, and we you know, and I've got to be truthful with you, we're finishing at 5 to 8 because I think everybody watches football. But, you know, I'd love to talk about how Israel has been portrayed by the British media, because that's what's causing this problem in the first place. If a guy goes home and he turns on BBC and he sees Israel bad on the BBC, so turns it over and then sees Sky News saying Israel bad, and then turns it over and sees ITV and it says Sky Israel bad, and turns it over to Channel 4 Israel bad, he's going to think Israel's bad. I want to ask you a question, actually, if I may, which is something, just to move off slightly, but something that I'm interested in, and I'm sure the British viewers will be. How is it looking from outside what's happening here? How is Israel seeing the situation in the UK? Do they understand the severity of it? Is it registering? Just how does it look to you guys?
Look, I think it's certainly registering. I think, as I said in the beginning, I think there is an understanding that, you know, what is happening between Israel and Hamas is being used as an excuse, as a pretext to launch, this assault against Jews, against you guys in the UK and elsewhere. I would like there, quite frankly, to be more action on behalf of Israel to show greater solidarity. I think that's critical. That's important, because ultimately, you know, you guys stand in solidarity with us, and we ought to be doing that as well. I think Israel has been, but something that can be stepped up, and there's a new government, there's obviously new processes in place, so I think that's critical. I think there has been an understanding that, you know, that the whole concept of, you know, that it takes a network to defeat a network, and you guys are that network. So I think that's critical in terms of the work that you guys do advocating for Israel, absolutely. But I think, quite frankly, I'm not sure if there's a full convention of the extent of the violence and the threats and
it's the
atmosphere and the dark clouds that you guys are facing on a daily basis. You know, we've come out of a war quite literally, and that was understandably our primary focus. But you guys are still fighting that war in your own versions here on the streets, in terms of the demonization, in terms of the attacks.
And there's not going to be any truce. There's not going to be any ceasefire. We're at war now, you know. And I don't use that term in the sense of violence. Although unfortunately, as Joe will testify, it's starting to look that way. But I use that in the sense that there's our side and the other side, and I don't see how this is resolved.
And one of the most interesting comments that I received was from a friend of mine that lives in Ashkelon, and as rockets were raining down on his city, he messaged me and was like, "Oh my God, it's so bad for you guys in England." I'm like, yeah, let's get a sense of perspective. You guys are going through a war at the moment. There's thousands of rockets raining down on your head. We're getting a couple of digs. But I do completely agree with what Simon said. There is the atmosphere. You can just feel the hatred in the air.
Worse than we had that period when Corbyn was, you know, a lot of Jews were talking about leaving because of Corbyn. I think now, I don't know if they're talking about leaving, but I do get the impression that the general feeling is there is that suitcase is back by the door.
I think look, I mean, we're talking about what's changed, and I mean, the truth is, and like I said, it's been building. I mean, the truth is that people like Richard Millett, Jonathan Hoffman, they were there 12 years ago, screaming at the community, warning them that this was coming. And our leadership, at the end of the day, had their heads, I mean, we have to face facts.
Yes.
Our leadership, you're talking about, there's the three of us, we're all independents, we all do this voluntarily. Where were they? You know, they're busy off with their interfaith, and there's nothing wrong with interfaith. Good interfaith works, but you shouldn't do interfaith for interfaith's sake. If you're going, you know, you need reciprocity. You need to build if you're going to build a relationship between the Jewish and the Muslim community, it has to be built on pillars that are important. You can't ignore Israel.
No.
And they've been busy bringing in These crazy groups like Yachad, they've let into the VOD,
which are not doing that, you know. And it's I think it's time that, you know,
I mean,
somebody says something
so
about
we're
it.
standing here fighting this. We're fighting this growing threat. We're out there doing the work that we're doing, and they're busy off playing games. And it's been going on for years. And I'm not saying we can point the finger at them and say, this is all your fault, but they should have, and I'm talking about the entire leadership, should have done a damn sight more, because it may have helped along the way to push back against some of what we're facing.
Well, let me ask, I wanted to ask, you know, from my perspective, what we're seeing, it hasn't occurred in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
It's been building up.
Right.
It's been building up, I think, well before Corbyn. And you know, where we're sitting here today, just yesterday, the British government announced, for example, they're pulling out of Durban.
Which is a success.
Which is a success. It's an important success. But the war, the battle is still raging. And, you know, we saw Durban, which is going to be 20 years coming up now in this September. And Durban, you know, was ostensibly meant to be a conference about promoting racism. That's what it ended up. A conference about promoting the fight against racism, intolerance, discrimination. But it became a conference about promoting racism, xenophobia, and intolerance. Specifically, it became this hotbed of unhinged Jew hatred, vilification of Israel, and the catalyst of, you know, the modern BDS movement. And I think, from my perspective, it's that kind of rhetoric, that kind of pervasive discourse vilifying Israel, singling out the Jewish state as a pariah, that ultimately has led to what we're seeing today. Words have consequences, words have actions, and it was, I think, in so many ways, this intellectual civil society underpinning that has, you know, created the manifestation of violence and assault we are seeing against the Jewish community today. So, you know.
Okay, so we Durban happened, and from that, I think you said earlier, everything leads back to Durban.
I believe
all roads lead to Durban.
All roads lead to Durban. The landscape that we see at the moment, the demonization of Israel, the vilification of the Zionist, all roads lead back to Durban.
Which was all done under the auspices of the United Nations.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also, there's another question with Durban, and I understand that we have had its success. I think the success was actually taken 10 years ago when David Cameron decided that we weren't going to the original Durban anniversary celebration. But whatever reasons, Durban's now, the UK has now pulled out, which they joined America, Canada, and Australia.
Mm-hmm.
How could any country be going?
It's a good question. I mean,
how?
Any country that legitimately says they want to promote tolerance, they want to fight racism, cannot give credence to this, there's no other way to put this, anti-Jewish, anti-Israel hate fest.
Are you expecting Germany to pull out?
I would have thought Germany also being the first country to pull out.
They haven't gone.
Germany pulled out of the conference marking 10 years.
Oh, did
they did. The reason the second Durban 10-year anniversary really paled away was because some like 15, 16 countries pulled out. The UK was one of them, Australia, Canada, US, a number of European countries, including Germany, Austria, the Dutch, and others. I would expect Germany would follow. Germany ought to be the first one. Hopefully, there should be a number of other allies of Israel, both in Europe and elsewhere, possibly South America, that I would expect should follow.
But then it goes back to my point. What are the UN doing? Why? I don't. I mean, yeah, okay, we know why and all this bit. But this isn't. Look at the facts. The facts are that 4 major Western countries all think this is too tainted by Jew hate to attend, and the UN are actually promoting this.
This is the same United Nations.
Madness.
This is the same United Nations which counts on the Human Rights Council members such as Venezuela, such as Russia, China, Pakistan.
The UN went the same way that FIFA did. I mean, it's this one nation, one vote thing across the board. It's crazy. You can't equate, which the UN does in the General Assembly. You can't equate the 300 million people living in the United States in a democratic system with Assad, but the United Nations does. It puts them together. One nation, one vote.
Well, it's purely a game of numbers, purely mathematics, which at the UN, certainly at the UN General Assembly, where it is one vote for one country, it's mathematics that we lose. When you look at the number of countries in the OIC, which is something like 50, when you look at Africa, Asia, and Latin America, it's a pure numbers game. At the Security Council, it's a little bit different. And you have to remember, the UN was created in the wake of the Holocaust, and now it's become the #1 platform for not only Holocaust deniers, as we're seeing Iran taking center stage, but also platform for anti-Semites. The whole, in 75, they passed the Zionism is Racism resolution. That was rebirthed, reinvented, repackaged for the 21st century in Durban. And that is something the UN has continued to take and continue to apply. Now, I can tell you, from my perspective, occasionally I've gone to the UN Human Rights Council. This doesn't get probably any more viciously anti-Semitic body than that. And I get asked when I come back, did we win the vote? We never win the vote at the Human Rights Council. The Human Rights Council, which has passed more resolutions condemning Israel, almost more resolutions condemning Israel than the entire international community put together, that counts. There's only one country only is a permanent agenda item, and that's us. So so why did you do it? And I can tell you from my perspective, quite simple. It was only barely 7 years ago when we didn't have a state, we didn't have a voice. So the way I look at it now, as Jews, as Zionists, certainly for me, as an Israeli, we have our sovereignty, we have our nation state, we have our voice. So there's an onus and a duty for me to speak up. But let me ask you, for you guys, you guys are on the front line here in the UK, standing up for Israel. It can be much simpler for you guys to just walk back, stay back. So, I don't want the hassle. I don't want to identify visibly, whether it's as a Jew or, heaven forbid, more Zionist. So why do you guys do it?
We don't have a choice. What choice? I mean, that's the 1930s after. We don't have that choice.
The problem is that not enough people do it in the UK. There's 300,000 Jews, and generally we have a lot. We had a rally a couple of weeks ago in support. It was around 3,000, at the most 3,000 people turned up.
And I think what everyone's saying, whether it's the UN, whether it's the media, whether it's 3,000 people turning up, it's all the same thing. If you care about Jewish survival, if you care that your grandchildren will have a future as Jews, then you have to stand up. But you also have to recognize the reason why Israel has more resolutions than every other country combined is because we're a tiny minority that's incredibly vulnerable. We have consistently, throughout our existence, or certainly for the last 2,000 years, have been a vulnerable minority. And therefore, if you care about survival, you have to speak up, because the other option is actually the angle which I think that many within the Jewish establishment, many within the British Jewish community, certainly within the American community have taken, is that of appeasement, assimilation, and keeping your head down, because it's the easier path, but it's a path to assimilation, because if you remain and retain your Jewish identity, then you will remain and retain that vulnerability. And that's why we have to speak up now while we still have the numbers outside of Israel, because those numbers are in decline.
Absolutely.
Jewish communities outside of Israel are in decline. And so there's an obligation for those of us that care about a Jewish future to speak up today.
And it's no good. I'm going to go back to the Yachad point as well. It's no good. If you're a friend of Israel, you're a friend of Israel. You can't say you're a Zionist organisation and then spend your whole time attacking Israel. It doesn't work like that. That's not how it works. It's not perfect. And I've said in my pieces in the past, when I think there's been something wrong. But when there's an organisation, Yachad, and what did you call them, the mod? They're foot soldiers or something, do you?
No, more the military arm.
The military arm of Yachad is the mod, right? and these people, they just spend their time looking towards Israel to attack it, not to support it. And we're losing, I talked about losing a generation, we're losing a generation of Jewish kids because they're believing the narrative. And the narrative
So what do we need to do to change that? To regain, not just to regain.
Give us all a few
those,
I think one of the biggest things we can do is change what we say. So one of the biggest problems with groups like Yachad isn't that they care about Palestinians. That's actually a noble thing. They literally we're sharing the land. That's a noble thing to care about the people who live in the land. The issue that they have is that you will lose to go back to the language of war, the information war, because you are facing an opposition which isn't selling nuance, which isn't saying I support the Palestinians, but they're literally screaming baby killer. They're literally screaming you stole our land, and there is no subtlety. And you will always lose the information war if you're saying yes, Israel's good, but it's also got all these terrible things that we're so against. When the other side is just pointing at you and lying and calling you a baby killer. And so
so how do you fight back when the other side has no care in the world for the truth, when they're happy to spread vicious lies inside them that we're seeing? I mean, how do you respond to that?
So from my perspective, the first thing you amplify the truth, which we shy away from. In the diaspora, we shy away from.
Not us, obviously.
No, not the channels here, not the people here, but as a community, everything is tamed and toned down. We're terrified. So Sheikh Jarrah is a great example. So few in the community spoke about what was happening in Sheikh Jarrah because they thought it was complicated. It's a very, very simple argument with Sheikh Jarrah. There's a 50-year legal dispute. Whether you think the East Jerusalem Arab families have a right to live in those houses or don't have a right to live in those houses, the fact that there's been a 50-year legal battle shows that this isn't ethnic cleansing. So if the charge is Israel is ethnic cleansing Arabs from East Jerusalem, it's so easy to refute. You literally look at statistics. You look at we're talking 28 families. We're talking a 50-year court battle. So that basically the Jewish community, the pro-Israel community, has to step up and has to stop being so timid.
Well, this comes back basically to what you just said. I mean, look, I'm mentioning Yachad again, which is for the third time.
But this wasn't the plan tonight.
No, it's far more than that group of Wombles deserves recognition anyway. But look, when we're dealing with Israel, and you just mentioned, Joe, that it's not perfect. It doesn't have to be. Who cares? The UK isn't perfect. The UK went to a war in Iraq. Nobody turned around because of the war in Iraq and said the UK must be destroyed and has no legitimate right. It's insane, the argument against it. It's just insane. And this need that our community has to bend over backwards.
Correct, yes.
Absolutely just bend over and say, oh, please, we want you to like us. What can we possibly do to get,
Which makes no sense because that's not working.
That's not what they're there for.
No.
These people are living in this, it's almost an Oslo illusion that we're dealing with this passive partner that wants peace, and if we can just sit around the table and fight, but that's not who the enemy is today. The enemy today is a hard left Marxist group and an Islamist community, like a network that basically want to wipe us out of the map. And a lot of them, both of them actually, have rather nasty feelings about Jews elsewhere. It's not just about Israel. Both the Marxists, like the communist groups, and the Islamist groups have no sympathy for Jews anywhere. So this isn't an Israel argument. So when we're dealing with our community and how we approach it, look, you can be a Jew religiously. You can be a Jew nationally. You can be any combination of that you choose. But if you try to be a Jew without religion, and you try to be a Jew without nationality, you're a generation away from oblivion. And that's exactly what's taking place today in the Jewish communities here and in the United States. We're losing.
But that's what boils down to that. What we have been doing hasn't achieved anything. It's got us, at the moment, as far as I can see, this community, the 300,000 Jews who live here, are on the verge of having to go or making the decision to leave. So let's change.
Well, we need to reinforce Zionist education.
By whom?
Within the Jewish community. Because if look, we need our warriors, we need them on our, we need numbers. We're not big anyway. What we need to do is we need to reinforce a Zionist education amongst our youth so they understand the truth and they understand the opposition we have, which hopefully would motivate them to fight alongside us. If you lie about the opposition and say, well, actually they want peace, you know.
I'll tell you what I want to see. I want to see when Mark Stone from Sky News tells lies, which he does on a regular basis, or what we perceive as lies. I want our leadership to call him out. I want them to say, this is wrong. You are not telling the truth. You're not telling the full story, or you're not adding enough context for it. And we have wonderful groups like Camera and people like that, and you know, people who are standing up. But I want everybody singing from the same voice, because if it's wrong, it's wrong. There is no ifs and buts. Some of the stuff he's done, and Jeremy Bowen, I including, and John Snow, have created such a hostile atmosphere, then surely every Jewish organisation, every Jewish group should be turning around and saying, no, don't do this. This is not fair. This is not right. And we're not getting that. It's down to us. We're doing it.
Absolutely.
We're doing it. And we're just unpaid volunteers who do this because we feel like we have to.
And I think that's about one of the comments we just received. I put it on the screen. I'll see if I can find it again. Was what are we doing to empower the young generation? And here we go. Here's the comment. What are the four of each of you doing to elevate new and younger voices to encourage them to join you, especially female voices? And Melissa, I think it's a great question, but I'd ask, what are you doing?
Correct.
Because why is it down to us? We're volunteers. And the communal organisations actually have big funding.
And you know what, Melissa, the other thing as well, I'm not as young as I used to be. You know, we're not young people. I'm certainly not young. I mean, Joe, you know, I'm not young. I'm not as young as I used to be. It's up to the young people to be reaching out and saying, what can we do to help? What do you need from us? We are there to help if we can, in any way we possibly can. We don't do things right. We don't possibly make things the easiest for us. But we're there to help.
I'll give you one example, something that we're working on the International Legal Forum with partners. It's initially sort of looking at the United States, working with groups extended with us and others, is trying to sort of apply the tools of fighting antisemitism, like the IHRA definition, for example, and how they can apply it, especially on campus. Because, you know, as far as I can see, campus is the mother of all battles. That is where
if we don't win that,
the intellectual argument is being made. That is where, you know, the leaders of tomorrow are being educated, brainwashed in some ways. That is where the fight for the future is. It's on campuses. So we're certainly doing a lot of efforts in that regard and trying to produce material in multimedia, in other formats. It's also consumable by a younger generation, because they don't necessarily read textbooks or big pamphlets in a way that they can consume it. But I think it's a fantastic question, and it is. I think that relationship works both ways. We need to hear from the younger people, from female voices, from other minority groups, what we can do, but we also need to find a way, I think, certainly to empower them as well and give them that opportunity and that voice at the table.
I think one of the biggest tragedies of all this, the real thing that will awaken British Jewish youth, is as anti-Semitism increases, because you're going to have a choice. Either you stand proudly with your people, with your ancestors, with their future, or you give up, you assimilate.
Sorry, but I've got to tell you, the problem is that happens, that choice is made when this goes to the next level, and we've seen the next level, what happened to Joe recently in Baker Street.
For those that don't know, I was assaulted leaving a restaurant. We stepped down the side street and some masked thugs jumped us and came swinging at us, screaming, "We're effing Zionists," etc.
You've got to remember, the thing we have on our side that has avoided real violence so far is that we don't look Jewish. Obviously, Joe does, and that's what's happened to him. But as a rule, we're not blue. We don't stand out as Jews. Sadly, something's going. I can't see any way back from this now. But I think the next stage, we've gone through the levels. And I think at that point, people are going to have to make a decision.
Ask yourself why we don't look like Jews. Ask yourself why the majority of British Jews don't look visibly Jewish. Ask why the majority of British Jews have a name they use in synagogue and an English name. It's the same thing. It's fear.
Are you guys, by the non-Jewish matrix society, are you viewed as Jews or British?
We're
Do
British
they
Jews.
differentiate?
No, we're British. No, I think we're seen as Zionists. We're British Jews.
So what's the question? Sorry. I'm not-
The question, do they differentiate because they see you're Jewish? They see you're Jewish.
Who's they?
The mainstream community.
The mainstream Jewish community.
Correct. If they look
Mainstream
at you,
Jewish or mainstream British?
no, mainstream, not
Non-Jewish.
non-Jewish community.
Oh,
They look at you, for example, the Syrian Kippur. Do they look at you first as Joseph, who is Jewish, or Joseph, who is British but happens to be Jewish?
With me, with someone who's visibly Jewish, I think most people see Jewish first, British, see Jewish first and British second. But I do think the majority will see me as British, absolutely. But there is something other about you. There is something different about you. But I think the same could be said about most minorities living in the UK.
Yeah, I don't think we should like create this image that mainstream Britain is against the Jews. It isn't.
No, absolutely not.
They view me as a Brit. I'll stand alongside them waving the English flag when England play in about 7 minutes. And no one. We have movements here that are growing, that are a real threat. But we have a government that is basically on. We can't knock them. But relatively, they're on side, which certainly changes the situation. We're not fighting it. If for example, Corbyn won, it would be a completely different game. We're dealing with a Tory government, and we're dealing with a mainstream British community that isn't hostile. And I don't think we should go down the road of painting them as the enemy, because they're not.
Yeah, and I think that the evidence of that is when you had the car convoy that came through my community, through my neighbourhood, threatening to rape Jewish, not threatening, saying that we need to rape Jewish women and Jewish children.
But
They deserve. That was universally condemned.
because it was Jewish. This is my point.
But if they said Israeli, would that have been?
No, the reaction would have been different.
So much tamer.
So much tamer. So if Joe had been attacked for being a Zionist, I don't think he would have seen the same outrage as the fact that he was attacked because he's a
If you had an Israeli
So if
flag,
he
they would have said that you
deserved it.
Maybe you provoked.
See, I've been assaulted twice. No reaction, because I was assaulted as a Zionist.
Yeah.
Joe, visibly Jewish, changed.
And we all know there's no difference. When they say dirty Zionist, they mean dirty Jew, and it's a conversation we've had 1 billion times between ourselves, and there is no difference. But unfortunately, a lot of the people in the UK, certainly in the left, have a blind spot to anti-Zionist violence or Zionist violence, violence against Zionists.
Let me ask you now, we don't have a lot of time at the moment. The football's about to start. We've barely even spoken about BDS. I want to know how much of a threat is BDS at the moment? As the way I look at it now, the state of Israel is strong. We will overcome this, but it's a threat first and foremost to Jewish communities.
BDS has nothing to do with you guys. BDS is always about us. BDS is about breaking down the Jewish community and the Jewish resistance. We see it in our community. The BDS, it damages the Jewish diaspora far more than it would ever. I mean, look, somebody buys an avocado or they don't buy an avocado, who cares? But we see the differences here and the splits within the Jewish community. It's serious.
So you've got the biggest issue we've got, and let's call BDS and PSC the same entity, because
PSC first of all.
Palestinian Solidarity Campaign is basically, they're the same thing. I mean, I've always tried to work out the difference, and I just think
BDS is a movement.
BDS is a movement. Anyway, for all we take, let's call BDS the Free Palestine movement in the UK. Behind every rally we've seen in the last 2 months has been the PSC, or by extension BDS. And behind every rally we've seen in the last few months, there's been antisemitism. Make of that what you will. So the BDS PSC have been organising rallies at which rabid Jew hate has been visible.
No surprise. I did research into the PSC. I captured demonstrations. I identified the people at demonstrations, and I quantified the level of anti-Semitism within the group. And we're dealing with 50% at least. So half of everybody standing there with the Palestinian flag is either a Holocaust denier or rabid anti-Semite. So
and they're on the streets of the UK.
Of course they are. And people look at them, and this is the really problematic thing. People look at them driving past, and they see human rights activists. And this is the big challenge for us, is to expose that truth.
We should all be, when I say all, I mean the entire Jewish community should say, look, anti-Semites.
Absolutely.
That's what we should be saying with one voice.
But we don't.
We don't.
We say, oh no, but they're not all.
And you know what? They've got a point.
They've got a point. And all this. No, we need to call them out. These people are anti-Semites. You know, what are you trying to get in bed with them for?
Let me ask you. So tomorrow I'm flying back.
Right.
Assuming I'm allowed back. Tomorrow I'm flying back to Israel. What would you like to see the state of Israel do more? What can the state, the government of Israel do more? How can they help in your fight?
Sorry, we're laughing because both Dave and I are completely unfunded, and all three of us are completely unfunded, and we spend hours and hours and hours of work, which we fit around our day jobs, which we fit around our families, and it's a thankless task. And the worst thing is, we're told every single day that the state of Israel pays for us to deal with Hasbara. So if the rumours out there, that's one thing the state of Israel could do. But the joke is there's a lot that Israel could do. Israel, the reason we're doing what we're doing is because Israel does a terrible job on the PR front.
But you know what, I get that to a certain extent. I get that they work in the PR. They don't really care. And I would probably feel the same. Then if they're doing the right thing and they feel that, and I believe they are doing the right thing, I don't think they really should be too interested in how other people perceive it. Because even if they did tell the story, it's still going to be twisted and still going to be lied about.
Israel, the way I look at ultimately, you guys on the ground will know best. You know what is going on. You know the sources. You know how to deal with it, and you know what needs to be done. So I would think that, from my perspective, what we need to be doing from Israel is finding ways to empower you, to give you the tools to do what you do and to enable you to do it. Because it's not only just the message, it's also the messenger.
I agree. I don't think there's much Israel can actually do itself to improve it, because we know whatever Israel does is wrong. You know, it's going to be perceived the wrong way by everybody, and it will be turned on them and used against them. They don't give vaccines, they get attacked. They give vaccines, they get attacked. It doesn't matter. You know, so I see Zionists like almost as the diplomats. It's our job to do the PR, you know, and that's what I feel that we try and do. So
we have to remember now, things have changed. 10 years ago, Sussex Friends of Israel was born because we did we counted the BDS demonstrations on the streets of Brighton outside a shopping Israeli owned shop that was being targeted. And since then, up until the beginning of the COVID, we would go out to the clock tower in Brighton to stand up against the BDS. I hate to say this, I don't think we're ever going to go back on the streets and wave an Israeli flag. I think those days are over. I think it's too dangerous now. I'm not sure what the reaction will be. So the fight we have now is the social media fight.
If anyone does want to join us on the streets, we're still going to do it. The Israel Advocacy Movement, where Sussex went out.
What happened last time? So I think we have to focus ourselves and say that the rules have changed slightly, and we do have to go. And social media is going to be such a big battle now.
We've barely touched it. I was explaining something in so many ways. Social media, you know, we're all connected to our devices. We have them on our phone. We're doing this on social media, but it's interesting. On the one hand, it's this cesspool of hate and vitriol and literal incitement to violence. But on the other hand, and I think on the positive side, as we're doing here, it's also an incredible platform for us to get our message out, to get our narrative out, to get the truth out to a new audience, including outside, you know, our traditional crowds, to those people that maybe don't know better, to expose what is the truth, to correct these malicious lies, to reach an audience.
I also think that it's really important that we don't at this point, normally at this point in the conversation, you might turn around and say, well, things aren't that bad, really. You know, it's okay, you know, but I've got to be truthful with you. We can't underplay the situation. For me, it feels different. It feels pretty terminal at the moment. It feels as bleak as I've known. It's certainly 10 years of doing this and in 40 years, you know, being an active Jew.
Well, I've been a pessimist for years. I think it's going to get a hell of a lot worse.
It is going to get a lot worse. I mean, just look at this comment. This is a guy who debated on my channel a few days ago. Absolutely walloped him, while alive. You are the proper anti-Semitic. WW, I guess that's We Are Arab Semitic. All of you from Europe, you're not real Semitic like us, or at least we're Semitic more than all of you. I mean,
He doesn't like us.
he doesn't like us, and basically this is the problem
He
we
hasn't
face.
even met me.
No, but trust me, you're right. But yeah,
But the anti-Semitism is spiraling out of control in this country,
Yeah.
and
sad.
the tragedy is we're the first line of defense. We're the fighters of the realm. It's like,
Do you know, that's really sad. In the living memory of the world's greatest genocide against a people,
Yeah.
we are sitting in a Western country saying anti-Semitism is spiraling out of control.
Yeah.
And that is just, I mean, you know, a century down, 2 centuries down the line, maybe you can see it coming back. But it hasn't taken that long. It's been short. I mean, it's 5 minutes ago that they were killing us in factories, and now we're sitting here. You've got 3 Jews from the UK telling people out there to be careful because things are getting bad again. That's just wrong.
You had, Lord Jonathan Sachs of memory, who said in 2016, a speech before European Parliament, he spoke about anti-Semitism as this mutating virus, and he said that in the 19th century they came for us because of our religion.
Mm-hmm.
In the 20th century they came for us because of our race. Today they're coming for us because of our nation state Israel, but the underlying reason and the underlying core root has been the same. It's because of the denial of Jews to have equal rights.
For sure.
That has not changed. It's morphed and it's manifested in different ways, whether it's through boycott movements or vilification of Israel. It's the denial of Jews to have equal rights.
Dealing with what's happening here and the growth, the answer was always, as a question of, because you've never eradicated completely, but certainly was always education. And that's where the country has let us down.
Yeah.
Because the teachers, they're all Palestine sympathetic. They don't
the unions
see,
they belong to.
They all see Zionism as racism. The campuses, in other words, all of the places where this should be dealt with, where the people should be taught about our history and our people, what anti-Semitism is, and they're taught the opposite, which is given rise to basically what we're seeing on, as people said earlier, we've lost an entire generation. It's been poisoned against us.
So we've got 1 minute before the football starts.
Let me ask one question.
So I
want to end it up on a positive note.
Okay.
In one word, what does Zionism mean to each of you? One word.
I guess at the moment, to me, Zionism is safety. Funny sort of word. I know that as long as Zionism, as long as Israel's around, I'm going to be safe. Which is sad, because I really want Zionism to count for something else. But at the moment, as a high-profile Jew, as somebody who is not afraid nor ashamed of showing that he is a Jew and a Zionist, I guess it would be a lot harder to do that if I didn't know there was somewhere I could go with me. But
112.
Okay.
You said one.
Okay. Well, one with an explanation.
Well, one word safety, but it's a powerful word. The state of Israel will always be, the state of the Jewish people, always be an insurance policy. But at the end of the day, I think Jews need to be safe wherever they are, because you're also a British citizen. So I think you need to be safe.
But this is, I don't want to leave here. I mean, I do want to leave here, don't get me wrong. I will leave here, and I've said this so many times over the years, I'll leave this country, when I want to, not because I have to. And at the moment, if I have to go, it will be because I'm forced out. And I'm not going, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's no chance of me leaving because of these scumbags. Yeah, I know, and that's probably the right thing. But to me, it's at the moment, it's just somewhere where I know I'm never going to have to hide my mug and doggy.
Look, it's such an integral part of who I am. It's difficult to extract it from the self. I have to say home.
For me, it's Judaism. And the reason I say that is people constantly try to separate the two. But in reality, Zionism is the destination of Judaism. It's the destination of the Jewish faith. Every Jew that is religious, in every generation for the last 2,000 years, has prayed to return to Jerusalem, to rebuild Jerusalem, to return to Israel. We say it at every opportunity, at every festival. And so those that try to separate the two are onto a losing game, because they are inseparable. And so tied into that is obviously survival, is obviously self, it is who we are, it is. And so for me, Judaism is the one word. How about you?
Hope.
Yeah.
Hope. For me, it's hope. For me, it's something that's inextricably positive, inextricably good. It's something that gives me hope that whatever is going on, that Zionism is a sense of strength and comfort and resilience, and ultimately hope for the future, hope for a stronger state of Israel and for Jewish people wherever they are. As far as I'm concerned, all of you guys are absolute heroes. I'm going back to Israel, and we have the IDF to protect us. We have an Iron Dome, but you guys are literally on the front lines, fighting the hard fight, and I'm in awe of the work you do.
You're here with us. So.
I'm here with you, and I think it's I think that's important to show also that we stand with you as you stand with us, and ultimately that we are irrespective whether we are Jews in Israel, in the UK, elsewhere throughout the world, that we are ultimately one nation, one people, one family, and we are
That's right.
united, and
Amen.
we are connected not only through our Judaism, as you said, but also through our Zionism and our connection to the state of Israel is this glue that
and you know what? They're never going to win. The other side, they never win. They've tried so many times. They try and they lie and they spread hate, and you know what? At the end of it, they're gone, and we're always still around.
Whatever, Lee Kern, one of my favourite Jews,
the best.
Whatever was in our ancestors that enabled them to survive, it's in us too, and we should take comfort in that. I think there's one more positive note to end on, and this is when we're talking about flags, someone called David Ridge said, "I ain't hiding the flag. Mine flies loud and proud in South Yorkshire," which is called Hakavod.
Listen, I think we're going to wrap up purely because we could go on for hours, but I think the football's quite important to a lot of people, so I'm sure we'll lose people. Pleasure to see you.
Quickly, one last time, socials, just for anyone who's joining at the end.
At Sussex Friends of Israel on Facebook.
At Mishtal, Twitter.
On Twitter, Ostrov_A, and also at the _ILF International Legal Forum as well.
And for us, it's PSC updates. I'm joking. It's the Israel Advocacy Movement.
Giving them free
Have a great day, guys.
God bless. See you later.